name is Gunpaladin, or Paladin Brie for short, and we're talking about my monthly books, because sometimes you need a light read for the adventure. Get it? Light. Okay, I'll move on. I'll be including the audiobook narrators because I love the work that they do, and because sometimes it's hard to crack open a good book on your 10-hour job board posting. I'll also be including some out-of-context memes that I had in my head throughout, and I'll also be talking about how I heard about the book. So did I hear about it from Book Talk or Bookstagram or YouTube, or did I just see the cover and my pro brain went, ooh, shiny? In the month of January, I read The Assistant to the Villain by Nicole Maehrer, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, Severance by Ling, The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake, Heavenly Tyrant by Xiran Zhao, and Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. Since I primarily listen to audiobooks due to the need to multitask while I side quest, I'm also going to be talking about the audiobook quality. So first up, I read Assistant to the Villain by Nicole Maehrer, which is also narrated by M. Eldridge, who grew on me throughout her narration, especially with her voice work with the side characters. The story was a fun break from some of my December reads, which tended to be a little more dense, one of which included Babel. I want to say I got this recommendation from Bookstagram, but I really can't confirm nor deny because it's been collecting dust in my TBR for a while. It was definitely something more lighthearted, kind of corporate meets fantasy, and despite its lightheartedness, it kind of delves into some of the characters' traumas, which I found interesting. I really liked a lot of the characters, and it had a moderately surprising plot twist. I think there were some tropes I found myself rolling my eyes at, but not in an awful way, so don't take it as a jab towards the book. I really enjoyed Evie and the villain, but I think some of the side characters were some of my favorite, and I found that the romance was kind of in your face almost immediately. But I feel like that's on par for a lot of romances post 2020. Again, I know that's some people's cup of tea, but I'm kind of a slow burn girly. And then of course I love side characters like Blade and Tatiana, and who could hate Kingsley? So if you're looking for a more lighthearted read, I definitely suggest this. There are more stakes in it than like cozy fantasy like Legends and Lattes, I think. And I did like the world building. I think the magic system was really cool. I like the idea of you getting your magic through trauma. I think that's just a little different instead of a bit of the chosen one that we see often. And I'm sorry to everyone who's obsessed with the villain, but I couldn't get this mental image out of my head. So enjoy that. I did see what he looks like by some of the artists while I was reading the second book, but it didn't stick. I still think of Vlad Tepes from Castlevania. Next, I listened to My Best Friend's Exorcism, again by Grady Hendrix. This one was narrated by Emily Wu Zeller, who I think did a really phenomenal job. I want to say I picked up this one based off the VHS cover because I really found it interesting, and I really don't gravitate towards horror novels. I think this is like the second ever horror novel I've read, but it had a lot of fun 80s pop culture and gritty details of paranormal possession. I think the book does a really good job of building their friendship over the, the decade or so that they've known each other, and really connects you to these two best friends. So it honestly felt really lighthearted up until the possession happens. And there are some scenes in this book that had my stomach twisting. Let me tell you, I was driving home listening to the scene, the culmination of the milkshake scene, and it was awful, and I pretty much wanted to pull over, but I had to stomach through the rest of my drive home. I was really on the edge of my seat throughout the final half of the book, and I really enjoyed the conclusion and the ending. It felt a bit bittersweet, but I think it was perfectly fitting of these characters. My third book was Severance by Ling, which is a post-apocalyptic novel that follows the before and after of the main character, Candace Chen. This one was narrated by Nancy Wu, who I immediately recognized from her voice work for the other audiobook I heard her in, A Venom Dark and Sweet. I really liked her work in that one, and I loved it here. I ended up adding this to my TBR after watching a reading with Cindy video where she mentioned it, and the story follows Candace's life after she meets up with a group of survivors and her life before the pandemic, I guess. I kept calling it in my head. I love the story and the character. She just gets so caught up in routines and rituals, despite the world literally falling apart around her. For me, it hit close to home because I think I get into some of those situations where I'm just going through my day-to-day and then I blink and it's December. So it was really fun to kind of read it from that perspective. Like, the world is literally going through a zombie apocalypse and you're kind of still, you know, gotta get that paycheck. It's haha sad. It also was written so well. I had to look up when it came out because it just felt so, it felt like such a good reflection of the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially with the corporate response, that I was genuinely shocked that it came out in 2018. So I really love this one. It hit close to home, but that's part of why I linked it. Definitely recommend this one if you want something a little more somber. My fourth book was The Atlas 6. It was one of my longer listens of January, and admittedly I kind of avoided this one because of all the hype around it. I blame my ADHD on that. I did the same thing with Orange is the New Black. It was written by Olivie Blake and narrated by 7 narrators, which made keeping track of the rotating POV pretty easy. The narrators are Andy Ingalls, Caitlin Kelly, Damian Lynch, David Monteith, James Patrick Cronin, Muniri Grace, and Theo Elsmore. And I liked this book a lot. It was a really fun modern fantasy. And I loved all the characters and how different they are from different walks of life, from different ages, and just different experiences. Then you add in the different types of magic, and admittedly, I love my Cuban representation. I was very delighted. But I also really loved the magical theory and how it blends magic with science. It was because of that I immediately recommended it to 2 of my friends who I thought would be very interested in how that worked out. The Atlas Paradox is one of my February reads. And then I have to say, Nico and Libby are one of my favorite characters to the series. And Callum makes my skin crawl. And I say that in a good way. I'm not hating. There are characters out there that are meant to make your skin crawl, and Callum does it so perfectly. I can't wait to talk about Atlas Paradox because at the time of recording it, I already started it. I'm very excited to see how this goes. My 5th book was Heavenly Tyrant by Xiran Zhao, which was the sequel to Iron Widow, a sci-fi reimagining of China's only female emperor, Wu Zetian. I picked up Iron Widow because I love Xiran's videos, and I read it last year when I kind of got back into my reading kick. So I was really excited for this one. I was honestly so thrilled when Libby delivered the audiobook early. This one's narrated by Rong Fu and Derek Kwan. Derek Kwan narrates the prologue and the epilogue, and Rong Fu handles the rest of the book. I originally read the book, so it was actually really interesting to go from a book and having this own like internalized way the characters speak in your head, and then going to a narrator where, you know, there's a bit more direction and perspective from how the author should think they speak. I also went into the scene that Xiran had talked about how different this book was going to be on their social media page. And I agree, it was very different from Iron Widow, but I loved it still. I really liked that characters having to pump the brakes because, you know, it's one thing to navigate a mecha battlefield. It's another thing to navigate political schemings. And it was interesting to see how much Zetian went through in the first book, and then how much is kind of done to her in the second book, and watching her kind of grasp for little strands of power. So when it finally got to the ending, I did gasp, but I think it was such a fitting response for Zetian to have. And another thing I really enjoyed about the book was how flawed Zetian's worldview is because of her upbringing and how flawed her feminism is. because she really has to challenge herself and how she thinks. And also, can we talk about how King Jen is a League of Legends player? If you haven't looked at the series, it's honestly such a clever imagining, and the world Xiran builds is so delightful. I spent a lot of the book thinking, how can I run a sci-fi D&D campaign with mechas, like right now? So Xiran, if you ever see this, do you want to play a D&D campaign involving mechas? And then last, but definitely not least, I listened to Gideon the Ninth. It was another sci-fi book that I picked up because it was described as lesbian necromancers in space, which is not entirely inaccurate, and what can I say? I'm a simple person. I also saw a few counts on it talking about it, like nadja.reads and dabbling, recommending it for character comparisons for Vi from Arcane. The book is written by Tamsyn Muir and narrated by Muir, who does phenomenal voice work. Seriously, amazing. Just the way she personifies these characters in such a fun and animated way. There are so many funny interactions between characters, and really listening to Gideon's POV, there's so much inner commentary that's just hilarious. I found myself laughing so much. I will also say there's some pretty grotesque descriptions, because while this isn't necessarily a horror book, there's necromancers, and it's kind of hard to not be a little bit grotesque when necromancers are involved. This message was brought to you by Paladins Inc. Genuinely all around such a good book, and from what I've heard, Harrow the Ninth is pretty different, so I'm very interested to see how different. That is also on my February reads because Libby delivered early. Not sponsored, but shout out to Libby. And that wraps up all my February reads. If you're ever interested in more, please subscribe, comment to tell me what you thought of any of these books if you've read them. And if you have any suggestions based on one that I liked here and you're like, you should check out that, hit me up, because I always love having new stuff added to my TBR. That being said, I hope you have a great month. I hope you stay hydrated. I hope you have good meals, and I hope you stay rested. See you next time.